Why don't you take a seat and tell me what appears to be the problem? Let's start with question 1. And question 1 was a short one, but I like it. Would you prefer OMAS or Delta? What a minefield a simple question can be. After all, there are people who love OMAS, there are people who love Delta. This is obviously a very subjective question to which I can't provide an objective answer, but I will say this. I prefer the materials of OMAS. I certainly prefer the nibs of OMAS, but 100% do I prefer the pistons of Delta. OMAS pistons can be fragile, especially in the vintage pens. I myself have broken an OMAS piston. They're fragile, they're difficult, they use a lot of ebonite parts in the piston mechanisms, and ebonite is fragile. So, for that perspective, and I don't want to go into more detail than I need to, you can find all this information online if you're really interested, but I remember for my OMAS 360, there's the piston and a sort of piston housing, which was a sort of spiraling piece of ebonite, which had super thin threads. It basically crumbles before your eyes. I said I didn't want to go into detail. I think I just did. I do apologize. That's part of the issue. I find the Delta pistons, even if that means they're captive converters, which in some cases they are, hey, I'll take that any day of the week because they're a lot more robust, in my experience, than the OMAS pistons. The OMAS nibs are something else, though. If OMAS was on the ball, they were on the ball. And some of their nibs are exceptional. Super smooth, pleasant, a little bit of springiness to them. Not all, but really, really nice. So, that would be my answer. Second question. What is the introduction to the videos? I answer this question that I have received multiple times over the years in the frequently asked questions page on my website, but I think you can only access that through the contact form, so I should probably put that somewhere where people can actually find it. Having said that, it's a bit of Byzantine music. In other words, Greek Orthodox. It's not actually Orthodox music itself. It is an apichima, which is the opening of an Orthodox hymn that indicates in which of the 8 modes that hymn is to be sung. And I want to say it's first mode authentic from the top of my head, but I could be wrong. If this makes no sense to you, you have no idea what a mode is or whatever, that I certainly wouldn't blame you. This is not very common knowledge, but go to the frequently asked questions page on my website and they go into a lot more detail that I think would bore people to death in a video like this. You can read it for yourself if you find that interesting. Suffice to say, sort of a bit of Orthodox Greek music. Am I Greek Orthodox? No, I am not. Having said that, I do really like Orthodox Church music, especially Greek, and secondly maybe Russian. Georgian is very nice. Armenian is very nice. Coptic is not really my thing, but especially the Greek Orthodox music I find incredibly relaxing. A lot of people do not, but I do, and because I have felt that way for a very long time, I thought that a very short public domain sample, it's a very old recording of a bit of that type of music in my videos would be nice because it kind of reflects my personality. That's why it's there. And again, if you want more technical details as to what that means, check out the frequently asked questions and I shall answer your question there. All right. I thought this one was a very interesting, very pragmatic question. Would you store a pen with some water in it if you're going to store it long term? The specific reason to ask the question was a Lamy 2000 that I believe made a very alarming sound when it was stored for a while. When the piston was used, it was creaking, etc. And the owner of the pen was afraid the piston might actually break. In my recollection, it did not actually happen, but it could have happened. Okay, so what is going on there? Well, I haven't seen the pen, but my thought would be something like this. Even when you clean a pen pretty well, there could be a little bit of ink residue in there that can kind of crystallize. At some point, the water evaporates, you have dye particles left. And even if it is not that, even if the pen was cleaned exceptionally well, there's still a bit of water inside the pen that you don't really get out because it's trapped in not exactly an airtight chamber, but a chamber with not a lot of airflow in it. And as a result, water can dry up and you can get issues with the piston where it does indeed become a bit harder to move and operate, and that is an issue. So, would I recommend putting some water in a pen to stop that from happening? I don't immediately see why not, except a couple of things I think you should consider. If you're dealing with an ebonite pen, ebonite and liquids don't necessarily go very well together. But of course, if it's, say, an ebonite piston filler, you already put ink in it anyway to write with it. However, at some point that ink is gone and then it's empty, that is different from, say, putting water in it and then storing it for 8 to 12 months or whatever. These numbers are made up. I'm not saying that putting water in a pen like that would destroy it. I would just be a little careful, and I would be particularly careful with making sure, because I'm not sure this is really a big deal. I don't think your pen is going to be destroyed if you put some water in it, if it's made of ebonite. What I would be careful about is leakage, because if it lies in a puddle of water for a while, ebonite can certainly discolor. On the inside of a pen, of course, it doesn't matter, because not a lot of us look at the inside of a pen like that all day. But on the outside of a pen, that becomes a different story. If you have a shiny black ebonite pen and you leave that in water long enough, it can become sort of a dull black. It looks a lot less attractive. It can develop stains and spots. Same thing can happen with other materials where you can just get stains. Even with an acrylic or celluloid, you can get little stains in the water. Now those, I think, in my experience at least, come off with a soft cloth pretty easily because it's not warping or damaging the material, but I would still be careful. Maybe celluloid left in water for a long time is not a great idea either. So all I'm trying to say is I'll be a little careful with that. But then I'm talking about leakage that occurs. We are really talking about putting some water in the pen. I don't see why it would be a bad idea. If you have particular input, by all means, provide it here, because I've not conducted any scientific studies on this. What I will say is water will evaporate. As I said, no fountain pen is airtight, including when you have a cap on it, including when you have special slip and seal and slide and slip and slip and slide and seal and whatever mechanisms. There always is a little bit of air leakage. It's not some sort of vacuum chamber, right? So over time, that water may evaporate. Now, if you're really going to store a pen for 20 years, maybe once in a while, and you put water in it, maybe once in a while you want to put some new water in it, right? Just to make sure that everything stays lubricated. Final thing I will say is, in this particular case, we were talking about the Lamy 2000, and the Lamy 2000 does come apart. I have a disassembly line video on the Lamy Safari. So should your piston get stuck, you don't want to force anything, you can take off the section. I show you how to do that in my disassembly line video. You can slip a Q-tip with a little bit of silicone grease into the pen from the front end, put in some grease, and then hopefully that helps in lubricating that piston. The piston itself can be taken out as well, by the way. You can also lubricate it that way. But that is more diagnostics / maintenance that you can do once in a while, probably should do once in a while, to make sure the piston keeps operating smoothly anyway, whether it was stored with or without water in it. I hope this makes sense. Final thought that I wanted to mention, but I forgot earlier. If you're going to put water in pens, if you're going to put liquid in pens for long time storage, I would try to maybe store them upright. So you make sure that no liquid starts to leak whatever way. I have ink in these pens. I always have them lying down on my desk. I haven't had issues, but that is not for weeks or months on end. So I would take that into account. Okay, that was an incredibly long answer to this question. I apologize, but the good news is that we were almost there, because I only have one question left. And I thought this was an interesting one from a sort of philosophical perspective of pen use, so I saved it for last. How do you deal with the professional need to work quickly, but the emotional need to write by hand? That was honestly a question that I'd never asked myself before, and I don't say that to ridicule the question. I just think it's interesting. And I think for me, the shortest answer is, well, it's an acceptance. I simply cannot write emails by hand. I know someone who does that. They basically, all their business email are written by hand, scanned or taken a picture of, and then sent as is as a handwritten document. But I don't think that that is appropriate in every possible business context or even desirable. And that's fine. It's fine if you do that. It's really cool. I think it's cool. But it's not always pragmatic. There is a certain reality to writing by hand. I work as a college instructor, so there was a time I would write out my classes, or call them lectures, if you will, by hand. But my process was to write out a lecture by hand, then transform them into PowerPoints and then use them. I don't do that anymore for a very simple reason. It takes too much time. It's too much time to do the work twice, to go from textbooks, articles, to handwritten notes, basic ideas for slides, and then inputting that into PowerPoint. I now go straight from my sources to PowerPoint because I don't have time to do everything twice. Having said that, I did really like the idea of handwriting lectures, because as we've discussed in other videos, and as you probably know if you're watching this, you probably like fountain pens. Otherwise, if you've landed here by accident, I apologize. I'm sorry. You probably have no idea what's going on. There's a bunch of weird people out there who like fountain pens. I'm sorry, I'm one of them. But the charm of writing by hand is that it forces you to slow down and think about what you're doing. And in certain ways, I still find it very helpful. I'm taking out here something I was working on for a statistics course that I'll be teaching in winter. This is Dr. Brown's incredibly useful guide to statistics that are not covered in our textbook. And this started off as a largely handwritten document, which is math. So it looks something like this, right? Those kinds of things do happen. And math I do by hand. So whenever I'm teaching stats, sorry for the crinkling, although people like that. So let's do some ASMR. Math is written by hand, period. I will put it in slides with the equation editor, which is dreadful and slow, and you have to click a million times. But, of course, that gets digitized. Doing the calculations by hand, seeing what I'm doing, that is always done by hand. It's just done by hand. It's not done in a computer or software. I know that software exists, latex and such, but I don't use it. That is done by hand so that I know what I'm doing, know that I'm doing it accurately. I find myself less error prone when I do math on paper than when I do it straight in a screen, which is interesting. The same way that I think many of us find it easier to read off of paper than read off screens, and I wonder if future generations will be more comfortable reading off screens, but I digress, which I never do. But that's kind of it. So how do I unify it, the need to be accurate and handwriting? By accepting that some things are within my control and other things are not within my control. Hashtag Stoicism, hashtag Epictetus, hashtag Enchiridion. In other words, it's just not always practical. I can't write my emails by hand. I just can't. Even if I wanted to, it's too much time. It doesn't work. I have colleagues who would probably be a bit surprised. I don't think they would be mean or unpleasant. I think some of them would actually find it cool, but it's not something I can start to instigate. I work in academia, as I guess working everywhere, but I mean, I spend a considerable time in my day answering emails, student emails from the administration about course things, and that's just a lot. I can't handwrite all that stuff. So accept that. I can't do that, but I can do other things. I can do my calculations by hand. I can take specific notes on things that I read by hand. I can think through things for lectures or maybe research by hand to think through those things better. And all of that is helpful too. So you make compromises. I can do that by hand, and a lot of the other stuff is done digitally. And at the end of the day, they balance out because that's the most efficient way for me to work. I thought it was a very interesting question, and one that I very much enjoyed answering. I hope this was an answer to your question. I appreciate it, and that's what I have. If you have any questions, leave them below. If you have thoughts about my answers and you think that I was blatantly wrong, stupid, or nonsensical, by all means point that out too. If you have other viewpoints, always interesting, always leave them, because it's interesting for the persons who ask the questions too to get multiple viewpoints. So don't hesitate to leave a comment. I hope this was useful. Again, leave your questions so that I will address them in future episodes of Consult the Doctor, and I'll gladly see you again later. Bye!